Well, thank you for coming to this event. So tonight is the second lecture of a series. We started at DePaul University, so it is organized by the Center for Catholicism. His director Bill Cavanaugh is here, and the new Holtschneider Chair in Vincentian Studies. So we are very happy to welcome Yasmine Cajuste. So I don't know you personally, but meanwhile it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight and to present you to our audience. Today a wife and a mother of a 3-year-old boy. You were some years ago a student at DePaul, where you received an MA in Educational Leadership. At that time, I heard that you wanted to arrive in January to start the winter classes. But your faculty advisor suggested you to delay. I quote, "January, really? Are you sure about that? I'm afraid you will get here and 2 to 3 days later, turn around and go back to Haiti." I arrived from France and I arrived in September, so that's a good time to arrive in Chicago. So Yasmine will present her experience among Vincentian organizations in Haiti tonight, so I won't go further. I just would like to say that your invitation fits perfectly with another news. You may have noticed that the recent Nobel Prize in Economics has been given to Esther Duflo, a Franco-American scholar, with her husband, an Indian, Abhishek Banerjee. They wrote together a famous book, Poor Economics, a radical rethinking of the way to fight global poverty, published in 2011. Their approach of poverty is original, as they don't think from a theoretical and global approach, but they ask precise questions and look for concrete answers through large experimentations among poor people and poor countries. For instance, we know that there is a strong link between poverty and lack of education. How can we encourage poor children to attend their classes? But also, how can we encourage teachers not to miss their classes? The policy of education must be based on educational provision. And there is no link between what I'm saying and the actual strike in Chicago public schools. That's also what Yasmine knows thanks to her work in Haiti. So as this year, in a way, is the Vincentian year of a Vincentian Nobel Prize in Economics, I'm happy to welcome tonight a Vincentian woman. So please join me to address a warm welcome to Yasmine.
It's good to be back in Chicago in the fall. But I have to admit that the 2 years I studied in Chicago were between 2 blizzards. But the 2 years I was there were really mild, so I'm happy. Chicago treated me well. Tonight, I will try to show how the Vincentian family try to answer specific needs, specific poverties around the world. And I will go from a very local experience, which is what we did in Haiti and what we are doing in Haiti, from a very global experience, which is what we are doing with the FamVin Homeless Alliance. So those two things don't have much in common, except maybe that for some reason I've been involved in the beginning of both of them. I was invited to join the team that started to work on those programs. And the second thing they have in common is that they came about as projects because we were celebrating something important in the Vincentian family, and we felt that as Vincentians, it wouldn't make sense to celebrate without the poor. So we wanted to do something with the poor, and that's how those projects came about. Why I wanted to start this reflection or the sharing with this question that we often refer to as the Vincentian question. Vincent at this time was faced with the reality that the poor people in the countryside who didn't receive the appropriate religious education And Madame de Gandhi asked this question that became the key question at the heart of what we're doing. What must be done? And we do this as Vincentian, and we do this individually by looking back at the experience of St. Vincent de Paul, but with our eyes open on the reality of today. Because the answers of St. Vincent can be used for today, but if we try to replicate exactly what he did, we're heading to failure. So I'm going to talk of those two experiences. The first experience is what we know in the Vincentian family context. So for those who are not familiar to the Vincentian family, when we talk of Vincentian family, we talk of lay, religious, consecrated organization, congregations that follow the spirit of St. Vincent de Paul. So DePaul University as an institution will be part of the Vincentian family. The CM priest will be part of the Vincentian family. The Society of St. Vincent de Paul that you might have heard of is part of the Vincentian family. So it's a broad concept that includes people, organization, congregation that feel inspired by what Vincent did at this time. So one of the first things in 2010, we were celebrating the 350th year of the death of St. Vincent and his partner, St. Louis. They had worked years together, and by providence, they died the same year. So when the Vincentian family was celebrating this, we were trying to think, what can we do to celebrate with the poor? So we had a little community sit down, and we thought about Madagascar, and we thought about Haiti, and we thought about another Latin American country, and we thought about the Philippines at the time. And I want you to understand that we're in 2019, fall 2009. So for some reason that I will call providence, we decided we would do something in Haiti. And what we had envisioned at the beginning has nothing to do with what happened afterwards. So our plan is, we're going to do microcredit. It was a time where Yunus was getting a lot of attention, and people believed that microcredit was the right solution for every kind of poverty. So we said we're going to do microfinance in Haiti. And to do that, you didn't want to start from scratch, so we partnered with an organization called Fonds Causés on the ground, which is spread throughout the country, and we said, we're going to work together, and we're going to create a website, which is Zafen, which means in Creole, it's our business. And this website was an opportunity for small entrepreneurs to present their ideas, their projects that would help them get a livelihood, and for people around the world, individually or as groups, to fund those projects with small interest, no interest, depending donations sometimes, and support those projects. So we were headed for that in December 2009, and then on January 12, 2010, the earthquake hit Haiti. And there were more than 200,000 people who died in that earthquake in the following months. But we said, we're going to start with them anyway. So despite the earthquake situation, I remember less than 1 month after the earthquake, we went down to Haiti for the first exploration of what could be done. And we launched Zafen. But as we were starting to work with Zafen, we kind of realized that maybe that's not the best thing to do. We realized that the poorest of the poor don't have the skills, the capacity. They're struggling with eating daily. They're struggling with sending their kids to school. Anyone getting sick in the family is a big drama for the family because it means expenses. And we realize the poorest of the poor, which is the one we want to work with, they're absolutely unable to access those kind of activities. They don't have the capacity to be entrepreneurs. So we moved from doing only microcredit into what we call the Vincentian Family Haiti Initiative, which was an international initiative, but focusing on Haiti. And at that point, we decided that we needed to establish our own foundation. So that's the statute we gave the organization in Haiti. We continued to do what Zafen was doing, was microcredit, but we also felt the need to get involved in other activities like human development, or supporting activities that the Vincentian family was already doing on the ground, and also creating social businesses, which means businesses who would be that would bring profit, and those profit could be used to serve the communities where we were active. So that's what we did between 2011 and 2013. That's exactly the time I leave DePaul, I get there on the ground, and I'm asked to coordinate the education program. So we put in place a committee that would help coordinate this work. This is one of the programs we had. This is called CLM, which stands for Chemin la Vie Meilleure, which means Pathway to a Better Life. So this program we did with Francosé, they would go in the mountains of Haiti, identify families with a woman living in very poor conditions, kids not educated, health access limited, no livelihoods, and they would have a case manager accompany those families for 18 months until they get to this day, which is the day of their graduation. And when they get to this point, they've learned enough on how to manage themselves and their family so they can access small microcredits. We also do an education program that included a feeding program. And we finally, towards the 2012 and 2013, we found a piece of land near a lake, and we decided that the social business that we would do in Haiti would be a fish farm. And this picture is from the day of the blessing of the fish farm. So we moved on and we thought we had it all right. And then when we started the education program, on which I will focus more because that's what I coordinated in that organization, we started working with 14 schools in the Central Plateau. So Central Plateau is really the center of Haiti, if you know Haiti in the map. And 3 schools in the capital in Port-au-Prince. The 3 schools in the capital was Vincentian School run by the CM fathers. We did feeding programs, so every kid coming to those 17 schools, we get a hot meal daily. And we also talk of quality education. At first, the plan was that we're gonna get there, gather the teacher, and do teacher training. And when we got on the ground, we said, no, this is not gonna work. We need to do way more than that. So we moved into doing an education program with different types of activity, but that would focus on having a baseline study done with the schools to know where they are with the standards of a quality of education according to the Haitian criteria. We worked them through for a year in identifying their strengths and their weaknesses, and then each school set, teachers and staff and principals set and developed a school improvement plan. And then for 2 years, we support them in executing this school improvement plan. So that's what the education program began. And one of the things that was very different from what they used to do was to have more student-centered activity, focusing more on what tools are available around us that we can use in the classroom. And we had a state inspector of education in one of our schools, and we would do training session, and we're like, I didn't know we were supposed to do that. And he works for the state. And that says a lot about education in Haiti. Another fact about education in Haiti, which is very different from the US, is that we can probably say that 90 to 95% of the education system in Haiti is private. So public school is a very limited concept. The Department of Education has very little control on what's really happening in the schools, which means that education is a heavy financial burden on the families. So we did this, and at the end of this process, we did a kind of evaluation of the work that we did. At that point, I was leaving Chicago, the program in Haiti for personal reasons. And we kind of came to the conclusion that the work we did was good, so it really made a difference individually in the principals and teachers, in the way they perceive what their work and their mission was about. But it was not long enough to have a real impact on the institution, so putting back many infrastructures that were needed in the school. Another finding is that the schools kind of expected a lot of financial input from us, and that's an approach we avoided because we just felt that if we bring some money in, we're not going to be able to do that for more than 2 years, and when we get out, they're going to get worse eventually than before. So that's one of the discoveries we learned. And then in the process, not only with the education program, but with all the different programs, we started learning about how difficult it can be to work in Haiti. the establishment of the foundation itself was a 2-year process. The identifying the piece of land, buying this land, and getting organized to start the fish farm took another 3 to 4 years. So we couldn't really go at the pace we wanted to go. And that's one of the key lessons we learned in this process. Now, it's important also to say that we didn't do the education program on ourselves. We were running the program, but our feeding program was done with an organization, a Scottish organization called Rice Mill, who paid for the food. This food service was provided by Caritas Hesh and the Office of Education, Catholic Education in Portland. So all those different activities that we were doing were really partnership with different local actors trying to bring energy together and take advantage of the resources and structures that already existed. So phase 3, after we've done that, we've getting to the end of the education program, we started an evaluation process, and we kind of realized that as a foundation, with the limited resources we had, we were not going to be able to change Haiti. And it made more sense to focus on a specific area. So we decided to go to La Jolla, which is right at the border with the Dominican Republic, where there's a lake and that's where we established a fish farm. So the third phase, which is the one still going on now, even if I don't have much details on it right now, is this phase where we no longer do education, we no longer do CLM programs around the country, we just focus on this one area. And either it's education, community development, health, or social businesses, everything happens in that one area. That allows the program, the foundation, to better know the community, better identify the needs, the potential, and work through this with the community. So this is the third phase. This is one of the ponds and the fish farm. The fish farm has its own story because we had these huge lakes with lots of water, so we started building ponds, putting cage into the lake and so on, and then 1 year in the journey, the lakes decided to almost dry out. So there was no way we could grow fish into it. So the fish farm as a social business is still continuing, but it never reached the scale we had expected it to reach, and we had to move, they had to move to other social businesses like peanut production and other activities of the same sort. So this third phase is characterized by being centered in a specific area, Savan-Perdu or La Jolla, focusing on community development and having those different kinds of activities to support the local community. And this is really a work that was being done with the community. It was really nothing defined ahead of time, but it was sitting with the community, understanding their needs, identifying the poorest families and working with them through it. So that was Haiti. We were celebrating, I said, the 350th anniversary of the death of St. Vincent and St. Louis. And then came the 400th anniversary of the charism. And once again, we said, we can't celebrate alone, we need to celebrate with the poor. And at this point, the Vincentian family leaders internationally decided, you know, if we really want to have an impact, we have to address an issue that needs to be addressed locally, but also that we need to look into the bigger picture and try to have global action around this issue. So they chose to address the issue of homelessness, and they created the FamVin Homeless Alliance, which is not a foundation, which is not an organization, it's just a project expected to be here for 5 years. It started in 2017, it should be there until 2022, and will eventually evolve towards something else. So, the FamVin Homeless Alliance is inspired by the theme that was chosen for the 400th anniversary, which is welcoming the stranger. And looking back at the experience of Jesus when he was born, there was no room for him in the inn, for his family. And that's the experience, sadly, that many people are experiencing today. So the FamVin Homeless Alliance aims to reduce, and when possible, end homelessness in its multiple forms. And to understand a bit more about the Vincentian family, it might be a bit tricky here, but the heads, what we call the heads, which would be the international leaders of the Vincentian family, oversee the project, but in action, in practice, the project is run by one Vincentian organization called DePaul International, which has 30 years, celebrating this year, 30 years of experience working with homelessness. So instead of starting from scratch once again, the Vincentian Family internationally decided to partner with an organization within the family that had a lot of experience with this issue of homelessness. We needed a starting point. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Institute of Global Homelessness, IGH. It's part of DePaul University. It's an institute that is based on the Loop campus and that works with scholars and countries to fight the homelessness. And one of their first work was to say, when we're talking about homeless people, what are we talking exactly about? And they came with this framework where they identified three main categories: street homelessness, people living in temporary accommodation like refugees or internally displaced people, and then people living in accommodations that are not adequate for living. So slum dwellers, favelas, and those realities. Now when you get into details, there are lots of specifics, subcategories, but let's just keep in mind those three main categories: street homelessness, refugees and IDPs, internally displaced people, and third, slum dwellers. So this is what, for the Vincentian family, we mean when we say homelessness, not only street homelessness. So these are the different target groups, and as you work with those different groups, there are some crossing themes that come along the way, like human trafficking, like modern form of slavery. So those are also things that need to be addressed. And in street homelessness, we also include sheltered homelessness, because we believe that a person who finds a shelter is not yet out of homelessness. So when we speak of what homelessness looks like right now around the world, it's a huge issue. We're talking about out of 7 billion inhabitants on Earth, we're talking about 1.2 billion exposed or at risk of experiencing homelessness for some reason. And according to the UN, this number is going to grow because we're going to continue to experience consequences of climate change. So we're going to continue to have population moved because of natural disaster. Urbanization is going to continue to create clusters and slums and all kind of conflicts that takes people in very difficult situations. So the FamVin Homeless Alliance has a number of different goals. I'm not going to go into details on opinion, but the first key thing for us is that our work wouldn't make sense if the lives of the people are not transformed. So that's one of our first goals, transforming lives. And then we believe globally that the Vincentian family is one of the biggest providers of services for homeless people. So we want to build this capacity, this network of Vincentian around the world who do that. We also believe that acting locally is not enough and that we need to look into the structures and try to promote systemic change, structural changes. And that as we go into this process, the Vincentian family needs to understand and learn better about what homelessness is about. So I don't have the opportunity, because of time, to go into details of everything that the FamVin Homeless Alliance does, but I will mention some key activities that we do. One of them is advocating for change. IGH and a team of people we have at the UN have formed a group that they call the Working Group to End Homelessness. They've been pushing a lot because the UN has never considered homelessness as a major issue. And why it hasn't? It's because it never counted its homeless people. The nations, the states never counted how many homeless people they have. So we're pushing a lot and advocating a lot for the countries to make a commitment to count how many homeless people there are in their countries. And if they do so, they will realize the scale of the issue and then start taking action to solve it. So we're doing a lot of work with IGH in that sense, trying to get things moving. And we managed to have homelessness mentioned for the next session of the Social Development, Committee of Social and Economic Development. In February 2020, they will have a conversation around affordable housing as one of the ways to address homelessness. So I don't know if you're familiar with the UN, but just being able to introduce a new word in the UN paper is just a great accomplishment. That might seem ridiculous, but it's a great accomplishment. So we're going step by step, and hopefully, now that it's mentioned, we're going to start moving towards having it considered as a potential goal in the next set of goals that the UN will establish in the next years. At the same time that we're doing this global action and advocacy at the UN, we don't want homelessness to become a matter of numbers. We also want it to have a human face, because homelessness is first about lives being broken by systems. So we're also working a lot on gathering stories and sharing those stories so people can understand that homelessness is about people, and that if our circumstances had been different, any of us sitting here could have been homeless, as a permanent state or as an occasional state due to personal circumstances. The second thing we insist a lot is, as a Vincentian family, we're not always happy to work together, or we don't know each other enough to work well together. So we're really focusing on creating Vincentian networks around the issue of homelessness. So in 2018, we had the Vincentian family, 100 people from 30 countries, come together for the first time to speak about what they do and what their experience of working with the poor who are homeless. That was a big event. And then we also have a smaller group of what we call ambassadors, who go back to their countries and kind of promote the work of homelessness within their countries. So that's another networking and creating collaboration opportunities is another key element of the work of the FHA, the FamVin Homeless Alliance. Another thing we're doing is that we're creating with Niagara University, we're creating a map, a worldwide map of where are Vincentians working with homeless people. Because we said we are one of the biggest providers, but nobody can give any number. So if we're able to gather as much information as possible, put them in a map, and show that we are really everywhere doing something with homeless people, it means that we can access more funds to serve the homeless. It means that they will listen more to us because they will see we are effective and expertise, a voice of expertise in the issue of homelessness. And we will be also able to connect better with one another. And having a map also has the advantage with all the technology available that you can take the map of the homeless ministries of the Vincentian family and you can put it with a map of migration movements in the world and anticipate where needs will be and address those needs or anticipate to address those needs. So that's one of the things, key activities that the Alliance is doing. And our biggest baby is the 13 Houses campaign. You wonder maybe why we do this campaign and why 13 houses? It's because at the time of St. Vincent, Louis XIII gave St. Vincent what would be today the equivalent to $1 million and said, this is to do the work of the congregation and the mission. And St. Vincent said, sure, we'll do that. He took the money, he found 13 houses, he got foundling kids, so abandoned kids, which was a big issue at this time in Paris. He got those kids into the house. He asked the ladies of charities, which is another branch of the Vincentian family, to pay the rent and give his money back. He asked the daughters of charity to take care of those kids. And that's how he created the first 13 houses. So it was collaboration, it was smart use of resources, and it was an answer, a systemic answer to a very important need, urgent need. So, and he did many other things with the different categories of homeless we talked about before. it was a time of war. His entire life almost was a time of war in France for some reason or another. So he would assist refugees from the war. He would create schools for kids in Paris. He would do different things. But the interesting thing is that all those different things, he would also engage the Daughters of Charity. He would engage the rich. He would engage the Ladies of Charity. So that's what the 13 Houses was at the time of St. Vincent. So inspired by this, we thought, well, if we can do something similar today and have 13 houses built in every place where the Vincentian family is present. They estimate that the Vincentian family is in 156 countries right now. If we could have 13 houses in 156 countries, we probably can easily provide permanent housing for more than 10,000 people. And that's a goal we set in November 2018. And right now, 1 year into this campaign, we already have 37 projects in 28 countries. We have about 3,500 families who have been assisted in different ways. And we have, we estimate, we don't have the clear numbers yet, we estimate that probably $1.5 million has been already invested in this campaign. Not directly by us, but through different forms of collaboration within the Vincentian family. So the campaign is about finding creative and long-term solutions to urgent needs, but it's also about local action through global partnership. So the campaign is not about us telling you in Guatemala or Mexico, you need to build 13 houses. It can be 13 houses, it can be a shelter, it can be a transitional housing, it can be apartments, it can be anything people can imagine. In Brazil, we're having a mobile shower going on, being built to attend the needs of the homeless people. So this is what the campaign is about. You have a visual of the different countries that are already involved. In dark blue, the countries will have a project, and in light blue, the countries are already thinking of doing a project. So these are examples of different projects that are already made. We have a project in Mexico that attending the people who were victims of the earthquake in 2017. We have here a project of Guatemala. This is a huge partnership in which even the UN is involved, attending about 150 families who lost their house to the earthquake that happened also. And this is the first 13 houses project that was made in Middle Work. So you see the house in the back. Those are not those living in the house. But the house in the back was the first 13 houses project that was actually done and where we had a homeless out of the streets. And just by providence, that person's name was Vincent. So our hope is that each person can have the possibility to do that very simple gesture that we do many times a day, but that for many people can represent a new start in life. Having a key and opening the door for something that is theirs. So to finish a little bit, how can you get involved? You can help us identify ministries around here that you know in Chicago or in other places and get in touch with us. We also gather in stories of Vincentians who've been transformed through an encounter of the poor and who share their experience, so you can help with that. In Chicago, we can have 13 Houses project within the Vincentian family. People can make donations to the Solidarity Fund. The Solidarity Fund is used to support projects in other countries. You can volunteer your expertise, or you can advocate to help other people be more conscious of how huge and how big the scale of the homelessness issue is around the world. I would finish with a few thoughts that are more personal, but also has to see with the Vincentian family as a whole. I really think what we've done in Haiti and what we're doing with the FamVin Homeless Alliance is a work that is guided by providence, in the sense that from being inside those experiences from the beginning, I can see how different pieces or different resources or different opportunities come together seems to be like so good timing that it's hard not to believe that there's a hand behind it helping it take shape. Also, even through our mistakes, I've explained things very smoothly here, but the process of doing all this is not always smooth, and we've had our difficulties as a family or in our work with others. The second thing is I have a strong belief that when we speak of Vincentian responses to poverty, it can never be isolated responses, and it's only when we work together that we get the best for the poor. It's only when we work together that we get the best out of us and the best out of the people we work with. So for 300 years, I could say, the Vincentian family oftentimes work separated, each organization being strong, doing their own things. And in the last 30 years, we kind of started to speak of a Vincentian family, and we need to continue to build this in practice to really make a difference in the world. It's important that we look at the issues we address in a very systemic change perspective, which means it's not about answering a need today. We all know this saying that, give me a fish, I'll eat today. Teach me how to fish, and I will be able to eat every day. But beyond that, I think it's the idea also that we need to be conscious that whatever little issue we are addressing, this issue is part of a bigger system. And when the Vincentian family chooses to address the issue of homelessness, it's because when you think seriously of it, when you think of what your daily life is, think of not having a home, and think of the chain of consequences this comes with. Health, education, well-being, all those little things that are so obvious for us because we have a home that is missing and so many families and people cannot access to. And finally, and that would be probably my final word, I believe that this Vincentian charism is a gift for the church and society. It's incredible to see a charism that is old, 400 years old, and that today can shape itself in a way that is meaningful to society and the needs of the world today. So I'm a very proud Vincentian. I also have the chance to have worked internationally, nationally, locally, within the church, beyond the church. And I know all the beauty and all the difficulties of our family, like our own families has. We know how it works. So the Vincentian family is not different. It's not always easy to get things done together, but it's worth it. And I also think that personally, each one of us is a gift to church and to society. So there will be people who will shine, who will be more known because of what they do, or where life has placed them, where providence has placed them. But the truth is that each one of us has a unique role in the fight against poverty. Each one of us has to answer the question, what must be done? And it might be globally, in general, addressing big issues, or it can be every day that we take the time to ask ourselves, what must be done? Every time we meet someone who needs help, whatever kind of help it is, every time we meet a poor that needs a change of life, and we can take ourselves, how can we journey with this person and let this person help this person walk out of the situation she's in, whatever the situation is. I really think each person is a gift, and I'm very grateful because I've had a lot of experiences where people have seen the gift in me and have allowed me within the Vincentian family to grow. And I hope also you meet those angels in your own life that help you grow. I will finish in that sense with how I came to DePaul. I was having lunch with someone that I will not name, but who works at DePaul. I was having lunch in Colombia at an event I was translating. It was February 2010. The earthquake had just hit Haiti. And I was just having an after lunch conversation. How are you? How is Haiti? How is the family? What happened with the earthquake? Typical conversation. And I just told this person, you know, I'm going back to Haiti. I've been, at that point, I was out of Haiti for 8 years. And I tell this person, you know, I'm going back to Haiti at the end of this year. But it's going to be really messy to adjust with the earthquake after 8 years being away. And that was the end of it. For me, that was the end of it. It was a conversation with, it was an international gathering, and this person had this conversation with me. 3 months later, this person calls me and send me an email saying, you have a full scholarship from DePaul. So it was a person that heard a cry, a need, that maybe myself, I didn't even think of. I knew I was scared to go back in Haiti at that point because of the earthquake that just hit. But this person listened, this person acted, and this person got me to DePaul. And I'm very grateful, not only for that, but every step along my journey as a Vincentian has been marked by those people that have helped me give a step further, take a step further in my Vincentian service. And I believe that shaped me, and eventually, along the way, I've helped shape other Vincentians as well. Thank you. Please feel free, especially the students, feel free to ask questions about things I said or talked of that you had no idea or couldn't grasp because you didn't have enough information. Yes?
So you said you were collecting stories of the way people have been impacted by encounters with poor people. What would be your story or one of your stories about an encounter with someone who is poor that has kind of changed your way of looking at it?
I think one of my experiences that I was not a Vincentian at that time. It was actually a time where they were trying to get me into the Vincentian family and I was resisting. Because I was at that time a scout girl, I was a Red Cross volunteer, and I used to spend my Saturday in the ambulance services, so if there was a need somewhere, we'd go get a sick person and bring him to the hospital and so on. So I insist on that. I was not a Vincentian at that time. So what I'm saying now is something I read later on in my life as a Vincentian. So it was a Saturday and I had to pick someone who was hurt with a knife and take him to the general hospital in the country. And the general hospital in Haiti is, you come with a family member who can make sure you pay for the service. That's a public hospital I'm talking about. And if you can't, well, you don't get the service. So this person had been hurt in the street, armed in the street. We take the person, bring her to the hospital, and the nurse tells me, so who's gonna take care of her bills? I'm like, I don't know. But my job is to bring you this person, you take care of it because you're the hospital. I'm leaving. And as I was leaving the church, the hospital yard ground, I saw a man laying down on the floor who was covered with dirty and animals or flies were all over his body and so on. And I kind of was shocked, and as I looked, I realized the person was still alive. So I asked the guy who opened the gate, I said, why is he? He said, well, they needed the bed in the hospital. They know he's going to die, so they left him there to die. And as I was looking at this scene, my partner said, oh, they're calling us for another case, we have to go. So I left because I was on duty, and that's what my duty at that time was. But I reflecting back on this later on, I realized that this is probably one of the poor that more affected me. It's a person I don't know her story, I don't know his experience, I don't know his name, but it's probably one of those persons who continue the journey with me as a Vincentian and continuously remind me not to go away when there's an answer to be given, whatever other duty is needed. So that was one of my experiences. And then Another thing that strikes me, because I come from Haiti, I've worked with the Vincentian family in Haiti, and I know it's a challenge in many other African countries or Asian countries, let's say poor, what we call poor countries. It's very hard as a Vincentian to work with other Vincentians in the service of the poor, knowing that maybe the Vincentians you're working with needs help as much as those poor that you're helping. And this is something as a Haitian that I live continuously with. We look at the poorest of the poor, so we don't consider our partners, Vincentian partners or colleagues, as poor. But sometimes they are in very desperate situations, and they are the one also who need our presence and our help. And how you manage this within an organization is not always easy to tell. Yes?
The microfinancing campaign that you started off with, it's a nice example of the bumps in terms of figuring out what works, what doesn't work. So what happened to that program?
So the website is there. It's not very, it was a kind of thing like Kiva, if you're familiar with Kiva. So the website functioned for 2 or 3 years and kind of gathered some money that was given to it by people and help people. But on the long term, it didn't really work out as a system. So we basically had to shut it down, basically. Or stop paying attention to it. From what I know, I don't know if you're aware of something else.
I know that they do. It doesn't. ZFN doesn't take loans anymore, but now ZFN and FamVin host small Haitian businesses on Kiva, so you can. They're still doing it on a smaller scale, but they're the supplier. So Kiva has organizations that vet the projects and work with the people who have the projects, so you can still fund small businesses.
But it's no longer part of the.
But it's not. Yeah, not part of the pension. So it's right. It's FamVin's project and through Kiva.
I have a question.
Yes.
In Paris, there was an experience with homeless people. Its name is Lazare. And so people who wanted to help homeless people discovered that it's very difficult to bring people who spent some time outside in the streets in an apartment. So they cannot take care about themselves. So the idea was to rent some apartments and to propose often to students who have time and are generous to live 1 year or 2 years in those apartments with people coming from the streets. So there were houses from men and houses from women, and you have one student for one homeless. And living together, it's a way to help them to start again to live, I would say, normally. Get up during the morning, take a shower, go to shopping, etc. Do you have because I was thinking about your 13 houses project. Do you work in such a way or different ways?
I'm not aware of any experience of that sort. There's a number of programs I can mention. One is happening in Chicago itself, at DePaul itself. I don't know if you've heard of the DAX program, which is run by DePaul USA, which is students who are at the brink of being homeless or already living in their cars and so on. So they bring them into a community as an apartment, and those students have the opportunity to continue their studies without having to face the challenge of homelessness. But I'm not aware within the Vincentian family of experiences of people living with those people. There is another project that was started in Italy, and now that exists in Italy and in Colombia. That's the two places I can remember of, where it's not, it's community life, but from people with strong addictions. So they take them out of the street, they get them into the program. It's very occupational kind of activities that they have with them, but they help this person get through the addiction, and then the person moves into independent housing. Oftentimes, a person who experienced homelessness for a certain period of time cannot go back to structure. And oftentimes, some of those people who are on the streets, they are there because they don't want to get in the structures. So DePaul, Ireland, for example, to give another example of that sort, when DePaul arrived in Ireland, the principle in Ireland was you have to be sober, you have to give up on your addiction, then you can come into the shelter. It didn't make sense. So DePaul, Ireland started the concept of wet shelters, which is a shelter where they tell you, yeah, you can come in with your drugs and your alcohol, and we'll walk through with you. We'll slowly limit the amount of alcohol or drugs you can consume until you become, you get rid of the addiction. But they don't ask you as a previous condition to be without this addiction that is somehow already part of who you are, and you have to learn to get rid of that. And so DePaul, Ireland journey with the people, and when they started, they said, wet shelters, it's not gonna work, and it worked. And that's very typical of DePaul, Ireland. Obviously, you tell an American maybe that you're gonna create a wet shelter in the US, big deal, but it's an answer that was given to a real need that was there. So yes, some people will journey out of homelessness, some people will choose to stay homeless, and then the way you accompany them in those cases is making sure that even if they choose to live in the street because they just cannot readjust socially or whatever other reason, but they know there's somewhere they can go and get all the support they need every time they need. They know they're not alone in the street, even if physically they are alone in the street.
So I'm with the society, and that's exactly what we do. It's more about just accepting that not everybody wants to get off the street. So we do mail drop for them. We facilitate anytime they need, whether it's IDs, because sometimes when they're on the street and the police come and they cannot, they throw away all their stuff. So they have no identification, and then most of the pantries and stuff in Chicago will not give a person food if they don't have an ID or anything like that. So we literally created our own ID, which helps out most of the people who are undocumented so that they actually have the ability to go places and get food and get health and stuff like that. But yeah, we realized exactly that there is this gap of people that are not able to go out. And most people do receive like Social Security, Medicaid and stuff, but the money that they have, so if it's like $500, $600, $700 a month, that is not adequate to pay your rent and to get your food and all of that. So some of them that are on the street do have some money with them, but it's just that, you know, again, you're now looking at the situation of affordable housing. It's not feasible, so you can't do that. Or some who are actually working. So when we do our street ministry and actually go, especially as we're going towards the colder season, we have blankets and heating mats that we give them. But sometimes you have to time yourself, because by the time you get there, some of them are at work. You know, they're actually working. There are people who are working. So there's this idea that most people think that people who are homeless, are lazy, they don't want to work and stuff like that. But it's just totally a misguided view of the situation on the ground.
Well, and it's always easier to think that the person chooses to be homeless, right? And then you don't have responsibility to give an answer to that. Just to mention a few Vincentian creative activities in terms of homelessness. I mentioned the DAX program for students, homeless students. It started in Chicago. Now they are about to open the program in Philadelphia, and they're looking at other places. DePaul USA is engaged in affordable housing, which is a little bit what you're talking. Having the person pay a lower rent that the person can afford with what he or she earns. And so this is happening a lot with DePaul USA. But the Society of St. Vincent de Paul in Florida especially has a St. Vincent de Paul Cares, which is a program where they accompany veterans, homeless veterans, and can journey with them until they give them actually a house where they can live with a very low rent or no rent at all, depending on their conditions, so they can get back on their feet. So there are lots of different things that are happening in the youth, and then all this lobbying that we're doing from New York and from Chicago. We also have 2 other activities that are very interesting. I don't know if you heard of it, but on December 7th, there will be the Global Sleep Out, which is an initiative that's going to happen in 50 cities in the world. 50,000 people will sleep one night in the street to experience in some way what homelessness is about. And there will be one in the Lincoln Park campus, I believe. I don't have all the details, but DePaul is involved in that. IUGH is involved in that. DePaul USA is involved, and I believe other branches of the Vincentian Family are also involved in that. So there are things happening locally, but also globally. IGH also have another campaign that they call A Place to Call Home. It's a campaign they're doing. They hope that by 2030, they will have worked with 50 cities that are committed to work to end homelessness in their cities. It's a firm commitment, and IGH accompany them with the help of experts to see what their issues is, what are the causes, what needs to change, so they reduce and eliminate completely the homelessness issue in those countries. So we have Edmonton in Canada is engaged in that. Chicago is looking into it. Rijeka in Croatia is looking into it. Sydney is looking into that program called A Place to Call Home, which is trying to have cities where homelessness is no longer an issue. And it's possible. It's possible. Because some cities have done it already. So it's possible. But we need to have a different look into homelessness. Not as something that is you can't avoid. Not as something that is the people want to be homeless, and understand the different element and the different level where the entire system get those people into the street, or get African people to migrate to Europe, or get Latino people to try to make it to the US. There are lots of elements that create those kind of dynamics. So I intentionally, I don't know if you're aware, but I intentionally avoided speaking about what's going on in Haiti right now. Until last week, I was telling Karen, I hope I can come. We've been for 2 months now with lots of riots. School has not started since June, so most schools are closed in Haiti. We're having a very strong political turmoil, and we don't know when it's going to end, but I intentionally didn't speak of all that because I think many people like me who are living there, we just don't grasp the whole situation, and we don't know what's going on and how it's going to end. So I just keep us in your thoughts and prayers. We know something will happen, and we'll move forward, but for now we're a little bit stuck, but we'll get through it.
I think we need to wait.
I know, right? I mean, in the last 2 weeks, Ecuador, Chile, Hong Kong, Algeria, Lebanon, Haiti, it's like, what's going on? There's this dissatisfaction everywhere, right? Here. Yeah. I didn't want to mention that US. I leave it to you to mention. Yes.
So there's a kind of movement in circles of dealing with poverty towards, in some circles there is anyway, towards just giving people money. Rather than setting up programs, just give poor people money and let them do with it what they want. And there have been some experiments, like with homeless people in London, where they gave homeless people, $800 and just said, do with it what you want, and then followed up with them. And the fear was they'll just drink it away and so on. But they found that people were enrolling in cooking classes to become a chef. People could get an apartment where they can have a little stability, find a job, and so on. But it's a controversial approach to just give people money. What do you have any thoughts about that?
So if I'm thinking, I would put it this way: if I'm thinking of 1.6 billion people considered homeless in the world by the UN, and I consider what amount of money you would need to give those people to get back on their feet and get back to have a home, I don't think it would work globally. I think it can work in specific environment, but it wouldn't work in Haiti, for instance. Because in Haiti, education is on you, health is on you, a family member dies, it's on you. There's no social support in Haiti. Everything is on the budget of the family. So when you give a person money, the person can manage for a certain time, and Haitians are very creative. You give them $100 and they create a business for you. So there's lots of creativity, but the system is what it is. And I think just giving out money to specific individuals, it's not enough. First, the individual gifts and capacities is not the same for everybody. So if you give $800 to a person who found herself homelessness out of a specific circumstance, like losing her job or something, the person can figure out something. But if you give it to an addict, it's not going to make any difference for the person. And then, depending on the countries and the context, it can make a difference. It might not work. I doubt that would work in Haiti. In Haiti, I think you would give them money, and 3 months later, they will start protesting because you don't continue to give them money. So, not because Haitians are worse than others. It's just because that you don't have any structure socially at the state level to support what they could do with this money. And they are at risk of losing this money or having to use it at any time for an emergency and then finding themselves in the same situation they were before.
I think here with the living wage and stuff, you'd have to take all of that into consideration for it to be an effective amount, because I know a lot of people that we work with that are homeless that do have some money, but when you look at what you can actually do with that amount of money, it's painful. So I think that if without actually taking a look at changing policies to make sure that there is some sort of equity in where we begin, it's not, the money is useless.
So, with all your experience, what has been like the best solution that anyone has offered to homelessness to you?
It's a very complex thing, and I don't think, like I said, I don't think there's one best solution. What research has demonstrated, although, is that in a specific city or in a specific state, what works better is when the different organizations working with homeless people, when they work as a network. So because you can have a homeless person that moves from one service to another, but if they work as a network, then they make sure the person doesn't find itself again and again in the circle of homelessness. So that locally, that's one of the solutions. But it's a very complex issue, and that's why the approach of the FamVin Homeless Alliance is to look into different levels of action, locally, but also globally, and then structurally, doing different things. And the combination of those different pieces can have an impact. But one solution in itself is not, cannot solve it all.
Do you ever find it emotionally overwhelming? People who need the work that you're doing, and you're seeing the statistics of 1 billion people. Does that ever just overwhelm you?
At times, I was telling earlier to someone, there is this prayer of Oscar Romero saying, "The kingdom is beyond us." And I think that's one of the things that kept me going. I see poor people in my daily life, and obviously there's no way I can help all of them. But one day, recently, a lady came to me as I was in church, and she shared her life situation with me. And she told me what she wanted to do, and I was able to provide for her, not to feed her family, but to start a small business. And that might be the one thing I was able to do among 1,000 people in need around me. But I believe that this one change can have an impact for this person, this family, this community. That's the one thing. And then just thinking that this is part of a journey. from a belief, from a faith perspective, the kingdom has to be, starts here, it's already there, but at the same time, the kingdom of God is beyond here. So there's something we can build right now. There's a change we can start right now. But what the kingdom is about is beyond our control. And each of us contribute somehow where they are, with the gifts they have, with the opportunities they have. They contribute to this big reality, but they don't have, nobody should be the solution to the homelessness. It's something that we journey with, and eventually, one day, the Vincentian family will not need to exist because there will be no poor. That's the idea, right? But if we think we can solve it all, we're not going to start working. That's when you get overwhelmed. But if you think there's something I can do, however little it is, but I know I can do that, and I do it with others, then something starts moving. You have no control of all you can do. I guess that's what keeps me going.
Maybe that's a good note to end on. Before I ask you to join me in thanking Yasmine once more, I just want to alert you to the fact that this is one in a series that we're doing all year of talks on Vincentians that are working around the world fighting poverty, and so the whole series is I think interesting. Yeah.
Different perspective.
And it's in part in celebration for the new Vincentian, the chair and the Holsteiner Chair of Vincentian Studies, which Mathieu mentioned, but didn't mention the fact that he is the current of the Vincentian chair. He's come to us from the Sorbonne in Paris, and is a very distinguished historian, so we're very glad to have him here. The next talk in the series is January 30th. It's Father Joe Fitzgerald, who's been a missionary in Panama for many years. I've heard he's a terrific speaker, and he's going to be talking about his work with the indigenous Ngabe people in Panama. And it's not about helping the indigenous people, it's about listening to the indigenous people and the prophetic witness that they bring to us and to the rest of the world. And the wisdom of indigenous people that I think we really need to listen to now, especially given the climate crisis. So please put that on your calendars as well. And now please join me in thanking